Well, great. Well, I want to thank everybody, Bruce, for such a great introduction, and it's really great to be up here lecturing with Larry and Dylan. But I'll move along so we can kind of keep it going. All right, I'm going to try this thing out, so just bear with me here. So my name is Davin Watney. Can everybody hear me okay? All right. Okay, so I'm going to start off talking about Feel Secure, which is the name of the piece that's featured downstairs, otherwise known as cop car paintings. Okay. Starting around early spring 2014, I noticed this vehicle situated outside of Marsh's Sunfresh in Westport. Does everybody know that place? Yeah? Okay, so this Dodge Charger security vehicle, and as Bruce has already pointed out, I have a history with Dodge Chargers. Okay, so this car is parked out in front of Martha's Sunfresh, right? Always spotless, always clean, at a slight angle, right outside the entrance, okay? So in my many trips to the grocery store, I pass by this unmanned vehicle guarding the entrance, and I start to pay attention to how I felt. Was I feeling threatened? Was I feeling paranoid by the presence of this object? So I was fascinated by it. Its aesthetics imposed itself on me. Its form catches my attention. Its color, its styling, even the font on there. I was both attracted to its muscle design and what it connoted, which is aggression and power, and simultaneously repulsed by this kind of like the surveillant poise of it, you know? And I felt like it's clear that the grocery store had hired this firm to send a message to the public, and that message is, we are on notice. Okay? So I thought about this, and then I turned to what I do best, and as that is paint subjects and objects in order to better understand them. Okay, that's how I kind of process things. It's like I got to paint it. So I started small, depicting these police vehicles on kind of a nondescript, dark background. So in the past, if you're familiar with my work at all, in the past, I've used night scenes as kind of a device to insinuate like a palpable vulnerability. And I think like crime is often committed at night. Most of our interactions with the police happen at night. So I began to look at other cop cars, and I found these new trends in their aesthetics. These new cop cars were sexier, sleek, and more threatening looking. Some had become more militarized, more high-tech, and then I painted them in a illustrative, kind of romantic style, but all the time aware, I'm acutely aware of this style of painting and its association with painting's long history of creating archetypal depictions of wealth and power and status. So representational painting has a history with it, you know, and I was aware of that history, and I wanted to invoke that history as well as subject it to these various types of what I refer to as a resistant mark. Okay, like see the big X on there? So, and the smear that we saw in the previous one, okay? So these resistant marks is what I call them. They're weak, they're cliched, they're impotent. However, I wanted to somehow visually negate this referent authoritative aesthetics of these police vehicles. I wanted to kind of like punch it back in some ways. So I would use these devices. I would sand through the painting, placing it upside down. These are all kind of, like I said before, impotent tactics of negation. Dripping solvent on them is another one. But like anybody, I get seduced by my own work. I think like, God, I spent a lot of time on that. I don't want to just mess it up. So I can't always bring myself to deface it too badly. And there are other times where I'm like, oh, I just really want to scratch the hell out of this thing. So I debate myself about the degree of the defacing and how I want to exhibit that and when it's applied. So the representational approach I took in painting these vehicles allows me to play with this idea of the fiction of realism. So what I mean by this is that these depictions construed to be truthful to the appearances of real things. Roland Barthes states that painting can feign reality without having seen it. So a seductive painting style can bring visual pleasure to the viewer. However, I question, does visual pleasure motivate us to act or to be critical? Can it change the message or the apparatus that originally broadcast that message? So these are some of the questions I'm wanting to put forth. So painting can seem like a pretty passive act in the face of all this, right? The many hours in the studio are not the same as going to protest, lobbying your congress member, making phone calls, as probably a lot of us are doing right now, or just voting, right? However, I think art's importance is in helping us to understand the nuances of issues like this. It can put forth a question in a visual form, so to speak, without the hyperbolic framing of language. So to further explore the complexity of this issue, I wanted to paint a scene of rioters, okay? And this acted as an underpainting. So eventually I would paint over it. So I wanted to try covering and revealing sections that I hoped would give the viewer a sense of the confusing way in which this subject matter, riots, what's the word I'm looking for, disorder, civil unrest, okay? I felt like media outlets all along the political spectrum would omit and reveal facts of these violent interactions to fit their narratives. So this painting, so you can see I covered it up here. This painting sets up a binary of Israeli and Palestinian tensions. And in the middle of these tensions is the U.S. in the form of military support. The vehicle, as you can notice, there's a little Ford logo right there in the center there. This vehicle is called a Sandcat Technical Protection Vehicle, okay? It is, according to an online magazine, designed to meet the challenges faced by tactical officers responding to high-risk situations like terrorist threats, hostage situations, drug interdictions, and gang activities. It is also employed in many violent interactions in Gaza and the West Bank. So what happens when these two images reside within each other? How do they vibrate off of each other? What does it mean to cover something up and to reveal something? And this actually is not the final painting. You can see the final painting downstairs. I think I scratched into it a whole lot more. So here's the final series together. You may recognize it from downstairs. So this series, I intended it for it to be ongoing, and I wanted it to build up to an overwhelming aggregation of paintings. So I intended for the component parts to be reordered or rearranged in different configurations so that it could fit in different spaces. But I stopped there. And this is a large painting here. So there are many reasons. I just want to talk a little bit about the militarization of police forces. And then the other tactic that I use is inverting the colors. So by doing that, that's another kind of resistant technique. So changing the potential narrative of the original reference image is a way to take down the threat of the vehicle and make it appear more ghostly, strange, uncanny. So there are many reasons for the militarization of police forces, both here and in countries that receive aid from the U.S. Okay, so the rise of SWAT teams, specialization forces, and federal grants that are given to local police forces began in about the late 60s and has ramped up during the 80s under the Reagan administration. So the many decades old drug war that we're still continuing created in the mind of police an us versus them mentality. So media and policymakers began to use language that couched a domestic problem like drug use into militaristic terms, using words like war, troops, enemy. Police began to see themselves as soldiers in a war. So during the ramp down in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, from roughly 2012 to 2016, federal programs made funding available for local law enforcement to purchase surplus military equipment. So this is where we find ourselves today at the beginning of Attorney General Jeff Sessions' first term in office. So essentially we have handed an administration that flirts with authoritarianism an extremely powerful set of laws and lethal weapons to use at will in the name of the state. So this brings me to my current project, which is called Picture the Wall. So the ideas and the formal considerations that began in the piece Feel Secure had carried over into my latest project, Picture the Wall, which is currently on view at Haw Contemporary. So Picture the Wall is a 10-foot tall by 28-foot wide wall spanning the width of the gallery. So I wanted the viewer to experience an impenetrable wall of images. I was thinking about your computer screen when you do a Google image search or a Pinterest page. I wanted to create a totalizing effect. And I thought about Walter Benjamin's ideas of montage and had fashioned a way to carry over this principle into the subject of history. So to assemble large-scale constructs out of smaller and more precise cut components. So to quote Benjamin, he goes on to say, to discover the analysis of the small individual moment, the crystal of the total event, and therefore break with the vulgar historical naturalism. So I basically subjectized or problematized, right? It's nice big $5 words. Okay, the subject of America, especially at its current state. So on the back, we have the admittance of artifice. And also there's these little didactic explanations that correspond with the painting on the other side. So it was important to me that we see the backs of these things. And that we see that it's quickly put together with clamps and 2x4s. The pieces made up of illusions, manipulations of mediums, not unlike other forms of media. So I wanted the viewer to be cautious and aware of that manipulation. So I'm going to quote James Baldwin here. The purpose of art is to lay bare the questions that have been hidden by the answers. So essentially I wanted to create a visual essay out of fragments. I wanted to say, America, this is us. At least this is part of us. So this is a fragmented history composed of images, a contemporary history. So history is memory. Memory can be manipulated, broken, and reattached in new configurations, building new narratives out of old programs. I also became really interested in how images are trafficked and how they become detached from their authors and the entities that publish them. So this is an interesting problem, one that has definitely come to a head in last year's election. So images have always taken on a life of their own, but now they can travel all over the world for free. Anyone can publish anything, and it all floats around out of context. That's really fascinating to me. I call it the image economy. I didn't coin that, somebody else probably did, but I will take credit for it for now at least. All right, so I want to see how painting can document this phenomena, okay? I'm also interested in painting these references to the digital realm. How can painting speak to digital means of production? So I enjoy the challenges of bringing dimension to images I see on the internet, and I employ what I call a paint your way forward process. So I start with the background or the farthest objects first, and then paint my way forward. So the objects and figures as they come closer to my position. So what I'm trying to do is kind of add space. Even if it's a shallow depth of field, I can still add a measure of space to it. So this is this vehicle is from Benghazi. It's outside the U.S. diplomatic compound in Benghazi, Libya, on September 11, 2012. And then so a lot of my images come from Google searches. These are Mexicans crossing the Rio Grande at night with all their belongings in trash bags. This is formation performance at the Super Bowl in 2016 without Beyonce. She would be right here. Oh, I can't. She would be right in the center there. I really debated on whether or not to put her in. I really wanted to. I really wanted to paint Beyonce. She's a great subject matter to paint. But I left her out because I thought, the thing that got everybody riled up were the backup dancers. And it's because of the way they were dressed. Their fashion style had a reference to Black Panthers and the Black Panther Party and Black nationalist movement. And that's what outraged everybody. So certain conservative political pundits like Rudy Giuliani frowned upon the tribute to Black Panthers, arguing the performance was anti-law enforcement and anti-American. So this outrage was widely promoted on Fox News and other conservative media outlets to inflame white resentment. But, it's all how it is in context with each other, and I'll show you what it ended up next to, was this painting. So the University of Texas student body had voted for the statue of Jefferson Davis to be removed from its prominent spot on campus. So here's the photo, and then here's my painting. Yeah, I'm sorry. I keep thinking you guys can see the arrow, but you can't. All right. So on the right is the photo, and on the left is my painting. And so what I've done is I kind of just sanded out the figure of Jefferson Davis. So you just have this kind of like this ghostly absence from the painting in which he once occupied. And then this painting is from a photo spread in the New Yorker magazine from January 18th, 2016. So the story reports the struggle of Sunni fighters in the northwestern Iraq fighting against ISIS in the small town of Sinjar. So these armed figures in the image are Sunni volunteers, just regular people, former teachers, cab drivers, plumbers, IT guys, you name it. Here they are defending their homes and villages from the constant threat of ISIS. And I kept thinking about the old saying, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. And so here we have paired together two paintings that expand on the complex relationship that we have as a nation with Native Americans. So the top painting depicts a contemporary scene from Standing Rock, based on a photograph I found from Outside Magazine. And then the bottom is a modified copy of a painting called The Captive. And it's got a really interesting history. This is a really old book that I had as a kid on Indians and cowboys. And so the bottom figure, as you can see, there's an Indian. He's looking over a captive soldier. This bottom figure was also copied by Fritz Scholder, who had a show here, about a year ago? And it's funny because the painting is by Henry F. Farney. Fritz Scholder mistook it as a painting by Frederick Remington. But so he isolates the figure, so it's just that Indian wrapped in a blanket, and he uses this very kind of intense hot colors. So I found that really interesting, and I always revisited this image. So what I did to change things is I took his shoes off. That's one thing I did. And I cut out the background, which depicts this kind of very bucolic Indian life in the background of teepees and people cooking and tending to their horses. I took all that out. And then I wanted to kind of show a reference that it came from a book. So you can see kind of like the spine down the center, and then at the top you can see a bit of the edge, the white edge of the book, basically. And then I flipped the whole thing upside down. And this kind of changes the power dynamic. It shows the white captive in this kind of Christ-like pose, flying above the Indian standing guard, thus creating this kind of victim-hero complex, often adopted by the colonial mentality. So these are some close-ups of the wall, in which you can see how fragmented images make up a mosaic of associations and context. So here's, you can see the formation, and then the UC Davis, and then we have Kellyanne Conway talking to Megyn Kelly over there. And then I like to use lots of flags, because flags are these abstract representations of nationhood. And so there's a lot of Native American flags, along with subcultures, gay pride. There are, what am I saying here? There are some commonwealths. So there's Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico. So these commonwealths that are not states, but they're kind of states. All this makes up our country. So, and lastly, this painting of Obama is based on this painting of George Washington here by Gilbert Stuart in 1796. So it was painting during the end of Washington's second term. And Stuart was commissioned by Mrs. Washington to do a portrait of both of them. And he didn't finish them. He just left them like this. And so he used them as the model to create over, like, I think 100 portraits of Washington. He could just, like, paint him in his sleep. So basically, this portrait of Washington became the model for the Washington's head on our dollar bill, okay? So I like this unfinished quality of the painting, and I felt it alluded to the unfinished legacy of Obama, so I kind of kept that theme going. And so I feel that we don't have the better judgment of time to assess the two terms of president and what effect it had on a course of this nation, thus leaving it unfinished. So lastly, I'll leave us with another quote from James Baldwin. "I love America more than any other country in the world, and for exactly this reason, I insist on the right to criticize her perpetually." Okay, and then lastly, just some shameless self-promotion. Picture the wall at Hawk Contemporary till June 28th. And I'll be doing an artist talk on June 24th from 2 to 3 p.m., along with artist Mikey Baird. All right, Dylan, pass it over.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you, Bruce. Thanks, everybody, for being here. It is amazing to be here. I would say that anyway, but as Bruce just mentioned, I received a double lung transplant 5 months ago. It is amazing to be anywhere. Amen. Right? Yeah. Thank you. So it's especially amazing to be here with all of you. So thanks for having us. So I'm going to go this way and talk about, so I was born with this respiratory disease called cystic fibrosis, this really nasty, ugly disease that just attacks all systems of the body, especially the respiratory. So I carried this my whole life and knew I was kind of headed towards lung transplant at some point. And I didn't want to include it in my work for like the longest time. I didn't want my life to be all about that, and kind of in the last 2-3 years reconcile that this is a part of me. It's not all of me, but it's a huge part of who I am. And so I started to ask myself the questions, how can I, through my work, transform what is a really ugly, nasty, terrible disease that's genetic, that you're born with, and one of the nastiest diseases that I know of. How can I transform that to something beautiful, to something divine, to something other than what it kind of is? And so I started to do images like this. I had been doing a lot of signage work, and I kind of kept in that vein and tried to just kind of visualize my own healing and my own, health, and transforming, again, this really ugly thing to something hopefully beautiful. So taking a bronchial tree and just adding branch after branch after branch, expanding, throwing glitter on the top of it, throwing lights. This is called I Want More Air, and this is a piece downstairs, which is basically just reflective of the journey of my life. Like, I want to breathe. I want more air. I want more bronchial trees. Kind of over-the-top decadence is what I was going for. This piece is at Unity Temple in the plaza now, called The Ascension. So starting to use medical imagery and kind of fusing that with, spirituality and faith and these kind of things, but trying to kind of find a hopeful spin on a situation that otherwise seemingly would have no hope. When I was born, the average life expectancy for a cystic fibrosis patient was in the late teens. Now it's mid-30s. We've come a long way, but still it's kind of this heavy reality. I started to use imagery of Nike shoes and specifically Air Jordans, not just for the kind of the jump higher, run faster, but this reality that there's air in the shoes, and I needed air in my lungs. And so, like, how do I, what do I do with that? And using that imagery to kind of like, this is what I desire, this is what I want. I'm basically making signs of where I want to head, what I want out of life, out of reality. This is called It's Loaded. And again, just kind of a glittery version of kind of my lungs with all these, kind of red, again, kind of imagining healthy, shiny, new cells flowing in or out of me. I'm really into kind of the Baroque and this idea of like art on top of art on top of art, so again, going from despair and ugliness to, these really ethereal kind of divine presences of pieces of work. I started, doing imagery with the shoe, kind of trying to lift off with phlegm, kind of sticking it to the ground. That's the reality of cystic fibrosis. There's this, like, you just produce an excess amount of phlegm, so you're always trying to cough it out, get rid of it, clear your lungs. And so this image of kind of the shoe trying to separate from the ground. I was still kind of using text at the time, and in a way kind of phasing that out, but the word bubbles are still there. So that's the words that are in there. The letters that are in there say like WTF, IHS, something like that. What the fucking hell is this shit? God, comma God. So, like what's the deal, right? What is it? I mean, to be born with a diagnosis like that, what do you do with that? Like from birth, know that you have this thing going on. This piece is called 65 Roses, which is a phrase in cystic fibrosis for children that can't pronounce the disease. They say 65 roses. So it's this beautiful kind of like, again, transformative, hopefully, let's turn something ugly to something immaculate, something beautiful. This is an installation shot of the show called Cure, which was kind of the first show where I included some of these works, and included the piece called I Want Air that's in the exhibition here. This piece also purchased by the Nerman Museum. So the flip of my bronchial tree, and this is kind of a literal depiction of what happens in a treatment for someone with this disease. You clap on the lungs, you wear vests, you try to shake out, your bronchial tree is turned upside down, and you try to lose all that phlegm, off of it. So this is kind of the tree dangling with that, hopefully that phlegm coming off. Starting a new drug at the time, which I was feeling better on. It was really the first to kind of target the gene itself rather than just symptoms of it. So I started just doing these collages and cutouts. This is all paper, painted, glittered, stacked on top of each other, collaged on top of each other, kind of envisioning my new healthy cells having a party. So some of these pieces were purchased by Vertex in Boston, the pharmaceutical company that developed this drug. And so, of course, they saw this and, and it all worked out. So they kind of this, again, imagination of like, what is happening? What do I desire to happen inside of me? Collages like this is called the internal struggle, the warring of these cells, good cells, bad cells, all of this kind of happening inside of me. And so I've just kind of continued to take it from there and just kind of imagining these, these kind of halo-like forms like the installation I did before at the Nerman Museum here, this idea of, again, turning something ugly into something divine, the idea of like kind of who earns a halo, what is that all about, how do you choose to enter into something that is understood to be spiritually respected, or how do you transform again from poverty to wealth in spirit and body and health. More collages that, again, these are started to be like aluminum welded kind of slicker versions of the things I was doing in corrugated plastic and foam and such. And so I did a show with Bill Haw Contemporary, and he really kind of helped. We together worked on working with Midtown Signs and kind of amping up the scale and the production, again, using kind of imagery and the language of signage. Still doing these collages, again, just kind of my imagine of like an elongated rib cage, stained glass window reference, that kind of imagery infused. Another piece called Tree of Life. So again, the bronchial tree inverted, kind of stained glass, colorful. Again, still some of the bleakness present, but trying to look beyond that, trying to look past that. This piece is called All Who Are Weary. I started to think of, again, not just my own bronchial tree, but others, not only others that carry this disease, though this piece is certainly to do with that. I'm thinking of kind of the interconnectedness, interwovenness of so many who struggle with this disease or any health struggle for sure. So started to kind of make imagery like that. And again, these are pieces in that show at Haw called Regeneration. So again, more signage type of works that glittery, healthy, shiny, new cells that I desired to have. The Jordans, my first, I grew up in Ferguson, which is kind of another part of my story. You may have heard of that town. So in 5th grade, I purchased my first pair of Air Jordans because they were on sale at Foot Locker for $59, and I figured this is the only time in my life I'll ever be able to afford Air Jordans, so I bought them, though they were a size too small. Yeah, I like the groan in there. But it was no problem for me. I wore a size too small for a year. Didn't exactly help my basketball game at all, but I was like the shiznit of, of the school. Like the shoes were like amazing, So, so I kind of have this history with those shoes. More pieces from the Regeneration show, and then this was the installation, kind of a long wall again, called The Congregation. That idea of kind of interconnected, interwoven bronchial trees. Mine connected to yours, connected to everyone, hoping to drain the ugliness of the phlegm and yuck and whatever, and find the beauty that is there. So this piece, we're trying to do something along it at KU Medical Center, along this walkway where the CF patients look out and all their view is a walkway. And so we're trying to go like, let's have a little bit better view for that. So I'm excited about this idea of like that they look out and see the interconnectedness of them with other patients, with other caregivers, with other and the like. So there's me as this show is going on. I mean, I can't even begin to express the kind of gratitude to Bill and everybody involved with that show at Haw Contemporary, because I was in and out of the hospital the whole time coughing up blood, essentially. Like it was kind of the end for me of those old lungs. And so here I was at the opening with oxygen, barely able to make it. That was a Friday night. I think I ended up going back in the hospital that Sunday night. It just was kind of the end of the road for those lungs. And so what happened was a lung transplant, as we mentioned. There's a picture of the old lungs next to the new one. I'll let you decide which is which. Yeah, like I was carrying around that on the right side, like the left lung had just gone, just dissipated, dissolved, and it had pulled my heart and all the other organs over to the other side. So they, surgeons are looking at that film going like, yeah, we've only seen that in about 2 other cases before. And each time it all went back, the heart and everything. I'm like, what happens if it doesn't go back? They go, it'll all go back, don't worry. It did, and so yeah, here's a shot, of a few days after, with a cord or 2 attached, and so when I share this, like in church context or any context, I kind of talk about the reality of how difficult healing is sometimes, right? This is why we don't do it a lot of times, right? Why we don't do some of the internal work we need to do, or the physical or whatever. It's hard work. And it was, 7 weeks of just excruciating pain. A lot of people ask me, what was that first breath like? Was it just amazing? It was excruciating, like it hurt, And it was just pain on top of pain. Now, but there's so many things about it. I mean, even in all that pain, all the doctors, nurses, everybody comes to me and says, we're going to get to you. We're going to help you out. Just wait a second. But first we have to get to the really sick patients. You go, what? Like, I'm not a really sick patient? And I'm hearing the life flighting for the helicopters back and forth all day long, all night long. And I'm praying for those people. I'm thinking about it. And, I go like, man, though I'm in the most pain I ever have been in my life, I have nothing but gratitude and thankfulness because somebody gave me their lungs. Like, could there be a more humbling gift, a more, like, what could I complain about? Like, I have nothing but gratitude. So I started doing shiny versions of the scar running across my chest because they had to cut me all the way, from side to side. And again, I go like, how beautiful is that scar, right? Like, you don't want anybody to have a scar. Like, that's not what we want. But man, when it takes a scar, when it takes a wound to heal, bring it on, So I'm very glad, and again, trying to visualize that transform, did kind of different variations of it. This is the scar kind of beaming out light. This is my ultralight beam. You might say, no Kanye West fans in the room, that's all right. So that's okay. So I started, again, I'm showing you some things post-surgery that haven't been shown anywhere yet. So this is kind of the scar floating in the sky, shining down on the snake. So this is called May You Shine Like Scars in the Sky. Amen. Are we preaching? No. Again, kind of dangling DNA. I needed new DNA. I needed new cells, which I have in the donor lungs. It's different DNA. Doesn't have CF, cystic fibrosis, anymore in that DNA of the lungs. So as Larry mentioned, the issue is rejection and taking drugs for that. But again, I have new, healthy, shiny lungs. I have new DNA. So I'm just going crazy, making like fireworks of DNA and new shiny, like, I mean, it's a party, y'all. Like, it's just, good on top of good on top of good. So this image is kind of the surgery called The Inevitable Healing. And so, again, this is where the work is starting to go towards more of these kind of collage, obviously kind of representative of what I'm going through. There's healthy, shiny, new cells kind of flowing in, people operating, people praying, people, like, it's all good to me, and they all have halos. The halos are like the cells. So, throughout my work, there's this kind of, like, science, faith, yes, bring it on, any and all. And so I'm laying there vulnerable on the table, wearing the Jordans. Because, I mean, you still got to shine, right, in operation. Just going like, man, the work, sometimes it takes that kind of vulnerability to just lay yourself down and allow yourself to be healed is harder than it sounds. It's hard work sometimes. And so I go like, man, I should have done this so much longer, so much earlier. But amazing, the fruit that has come from that. So that's what I have. But I have one more request before we go, because what I do when I share this story with anybody, this kind of story of healing, my son demands that I get a picture with everybody involved. And he not only demands that I get a picture, but he goes like, have everybody dab, like in celebration, like have everybody. So I'm going to take a quick picture of me with all y'all, if that's okay. Are we down to? Yeah. There we go. So you got to stand up if you're able and dab with me, okay? Thank you, everybody.